one of those fronts where we have seen the tensions has been with Huawei, the U.S. Accusing Huawei of some cybersecurity risks. We have seen some temporary licenses for the company, though. How long can we expect this to continue? And could we see anything in writing when it comes to a trade deal on Huawei?
Well, I think we've seen that the trade deal that we're being promised is potentially not as solid as we were told last week. The nature of a trade deal right now would have to take into account the security of the countries involved. And of course, it would begin to address the fact that Huawei is certainly a sensitive topic in the United States in terms of infrastructure and internet service provision. We're seeing splits in the United States and our allies in terms of our policy towards Huawei. For instance, Germany, of course, just a little bit ago, decided to continue servicing their internet infrastructure with Huawei. And that's either going to create a pressure on the United States or it's going to get some folks to put their feet down.
On those cybersecurity concerns, I just spoke recently to Huawei's Chief Security Officer, Andy Purdy, and this is what he had to say. Take a listen.
So we have committed as a global company to spend $2 billion over the next 5 years to improve our software engineering processes, to eliminate the clutter in our code, to make sure we're more consistent so that there won't be as many vulnerabilities that are there, and also to make our code more readily adaptable for the new technologies of artificial intelligence and other technologies that are coming forward. And in fact, we think our competitors would really value from similar evaluations of their products, so it would help make their products more secure as well.
What Andy was basically telling me was that everybody has to pitch in when it comes to cybersecurity. Now, what happens if the ongoing trade tensions lead to three different internet sets of regulations and firms unable to cooperate cross-border?
I've been talking about the concept of three internets for a period of time now. It's growing more defined, more distinct, that as regulatory environments split in their requirements and the norms that they're trying to preserve, that we're going to see a Chinese, a European, and a U.S. and the rest of the world internet. And what we're seeing over time is that tension is not just developing between the United States and with China, it's developing in those three internets. The recent French cybersecurity strategy didn't bother to put out an English translation, and that tells us something about how the world is splitting up the regulatory burden of trying to ensure both internet provision and information security.
Tarah, we were just speaking a couple of minutes ago about the hot water that Apple is currently in for sharing information and data with Tencent. This concept of multiple internets and multiple sets of regulation, where does that leave companies that do business, as many of them do, across borders?
It's a hard one. Coming out of the information security industry, as I do, I've grappled with these problems before. And when you have to translate multiple regulatory environments into product development, especially in security and in technology, hard choices get made. And what we often see is that you'll get companies that'll focus on a specific market or a product that they find themselves being able to specialize in better. Sometimes that ends up leaving people who need that service provided or that security provided to them in the dust as those more gains-based choices are made. And as companies try to make those decisions, we're going to start seeing them specialize in one of those three areas where they comply with the regulatory framework that they find themselves most commonly dealing with. GDPR was a big wake-up call for American companies in terms of what we needed to do to just simply guarantee someone's data had been deleted. And we're starting to see new regulatory environments compete over time. After all, if a U.S. citizen is in Beijing and requests that their information be deleted from BlaBlaCar in France, what regulatory environment actually covers that? It's an ongoing and interesting question, and the answer right now is probably someplace in an AWS cloud instance.
Is enough consideration being given to this potential future risk? I mean, is enough investment being made to try and future-proof for these companies? And if not, what should they be trying to do?
Most companies are bad at future-proofing regardless of the regulatory environment, but the ones that are paying attention are doing their best to make customer-centric, or better yet, user-centric decisions. I think we know at this point that just because you're a user of a company's product doesn't necessarily mean you're their customer. Most of the time, the people buying the data from that company is their actual customer. And so if companies want to future-proof in order to not just try to protect their prices, but to reserve their capacity to defend against different regulatory environments that are attempting to protect consumers, then maybe make those choices to defend and protect the consumers, the users, and the people that don't even know you exist before starting to worry about your profits over time and in a quarter far, far away.
In the meantime, are U.S. policymakers correct in worrying about these cybersecurity risks and potentially sensitive information being acquired by China, given that we do have that 2017 China's national intelligence law where these firms, Chinese firms, are compelled to turn over any information that they have if the Communist Party asks them to?
There's reason to be concerned there. I think we understand that WeChat, a commonly used app in China for both talking and payment systems, is something that, of course, built by Tencent, is deeply in cooperation with the Chinese government. And one of the things we know about companies worrying about data being transferred back and forth, and the United States government worrying about data being transferred back and forth, is that if you don't necessarily always know who's listening in, you have Heisenberg's hacker. If you do know who's listening in, you can start to build some form of protection against that. However, what we're seeing with companies like those in China that have deliberately weak or backdoored encryption is that once encryption's been compromised in a given system, on software, on a phone, it functionally doesn't exist anymore for the most competent and dangerous people and technologists on Earth. That's what the U.S. government needs to be worrying about: strong encryption, ensuring the rights of the consumer are protected, and making sure that as we have these conversations going forward with our, hopefully, partners again one day in the European Union and in China, that we are protecting the rights of people that don't know that most internet infrastructure exists. These are the people that use these products, and they're the ones that are being surveilled.
Tarah, if China is the most obvious and high-profile competitor/opponent, what other country should we also be paying a bit more attention to? We know that there's been discussions over Huawei and 5G with India, for example.
5G's functionally just 2 orders of magnitude faster than 4G. It's just a faster car. It gets you there quicker. Now, it doesn't just help us transition and handle many bandwidth problems in the kind of mobile infrastructure that pops up over time. It also helps to reduce the space between you and anyone watching you. India, unfortunately, has had an attitude towards encryption and consumer protection that has not been user-focused over time. And after seeing the Aadhaar data leaks, there's some concern there that an infrastructure in India that surveils without protecting could be something that not only harms the people that are relying on those services for privacy and for service provision, but also can provide a poor example for the kind of infrastructure that the U.S. should be looking to emulate. And we need some examples now, not just competitors. The European Union is a better example that the United States should, in fact, be following. We should be taking care with our consumers, creating the kinds of regulatory frameworks that we're seeing, for instance, in California, fortunately, with CCPA. Assembly Bill 375 was one of the first steps the U.S. took towards protecting consumers. And we worry less about competition if ordinary human beings who have a cell phone in their hands know how to keep themselves safe and are being protected by the environment in which they live. That's the key. That's the piece that helps us not just reduce competition and friction, but also helps us make technology accessible, secure, and private for everyone.